Hello and welcome to Unit 5, Part 6. My name is Mr. Bell, and today we're going to look at identifying and explaining the key features from graphs. On this slide, you'll notice a graph comparing two values to each other. And it says find the rate of change for a specific interval and describe trends at specific interval. So looking at number 1, it says which interval, and interval just means which section of the graph, so to speak, which portion of the domain has the greatest rate of change. Rate of change, if you don't recall, rate of change is the change in y over the change in x. It's also known as the slope of the graph. So really what you're looking at when you're given a graph and given an image to look at, for the greatest rate of change, you're looking for which line has the steepest slope. So looking at our different time intervals here, we've got several different slopes to look at, but to me, this interval right here appears to be the steepest of all of those lines. So the interval from 0 to 10 is where the rate of change is the highest. So I'm going to put of the domain from 0 to 10 is where the greatest rate of change occurs. Question number 2 says, what is the rate of change between the domain of 30 and 40? And remember, domain represents the x values, range represents the y values. So if I'm looking for the rate of change from 30 to 40, I've got to go back to my formula for rate of change, or my formula for slope, which was the change in y over the change in x. So let's see what the change in y is. I'm going to put a little dotted line to help me represent that interval that we're looking at. We're looking at from 30 to 40. The change in y at that interval went from 200 up to 300. So my y value went from 200 to 300. So my change in y, my y value was 300 minus 200, giving me a change of y of 100. Now don't forget that rate of change also involves dividing by the change in x. So we have our change in y values of that interval was 100. Now we got to divide that by the change in x. So what was the change from 30 to 40? And it was a change of 10. 100 over 10 can be reduced to 10 over 1. And 10 over 1 represents my rate of change here. For every rise of 10, I have to run of 1. I have to go up 10 over 1, which is the same thing as going up 100 and over 10. So for that time interval, when I went up 100 places, my graph shifted over 10 places to the right. On this slide, you'll see that we have been given two different quadratic functions, quadratic A and quadratic B, and you're asked to identify the key parts of those graphs, the vertex, the X-Intercepts, and the Y-Intercept of each one. So what I'm fixing to do is I'm fixing to swap my format and actually go to a video of me inputting these quadratic functions in the calculator, and I'm going to show you how to find these values actually on the calculator. All right, now that we have our calculator set up, we're going to take a look at quadratic A and quadratic B and see if we can identify these key features of the graphs. I'm going to start by going to the menu, hitting number 5 to access my graph, and I'm going to begin by carefully inputting the quadratic function that I want to look at the graph for. Negative x squared minus 7x minus 10. Now I'm going to hit execute, and then F6 is to draw an image of this quadratic. There it is. So now we need to identify some key parts, and sometimes it can be very difficult to do just looking at the screen because there's no numbers on the graph, and sometimes they get really small. Here's what you can do. F5, it says G-solve above it. If you will hit the F5 button, it gives you a whole list of options of a lot of the key features that we want. In this case, if we're looking for the vertex, recall that a vertex, let's do this here. A vertex is either the very top of a graph or the very bottom point of a graph. If it's the very top of the graph, a lot of times they'll call it a maximum value.
because that is the maximum value that that graph has. It's the very peak, the very top. If the graph made a U shape, like this other quadratic but flipped the other way, this one would be called a minimum value, a minimum. This vertex is a minimum of the graph. This vertex is a maximum of the graph. That being said, this particular graph has a maximum value. It makes like a mountaintop. It has a peak, a top, a maximum value. So above the F2 button, you will see that it says max. Well, if you want to find the value of that maximum point, you hit max. It gave me a vertex of the x value is negative 3.5 and the y value is 2.25. Those are the coordinates of the maximum value or the vertex of my graph. X-intercepts, you may remember from the previous chapter, those are also called roots or zeros. Well, if you hit F5 again, the first option there above F1 says root, and you can hit that button and the calculator will tell you what the roots are. The first root on the left is negative 5, 0. And remember, this graph crosses the x-axis twice, so we need to use the navigation wheel to slide over and get the second root, which is negative 2, 0. Those are the x-intercepts of this function. And the last one says y-intercept. Hit F5 again. Y-intercept is the option above the F4, so let's hit that and see what the value of the y-intercept is. X is 0 and the y-intercept is negative 10. All right, pretty straightforward. Let's go back. I'm going to exit back to my graphing menu. I'm going to go up and delete the one that we have so that I'm able to do quadratic B, which is x squared minus 4, x squared minus 4. I'm going to execute and draw. There it is. To find this vertex, when I go to F5 to get all my options, remember this graph makes a U like a bowl. It has a minimum value, not the maximum value. This quadratic goes on forever, so it does not have a maximum value, but it does have a bottom, a minimum. So to find this value, you have to hit F3. Above the F3 is the minimum option. The value of this vertex, which is a minimum, is 0, negative 4. To find the x-intercepts, you hit G-solve, and x-intercepts are also called roots. My left root is negative 2, 0. Use the navigation wheel to slide over to the right root, which is positive 2, 0. And the last key feature is the y-intercept, which we can get by hitting F5 again. Above the F4 says y-intercept. That value is also 0, negative 4. All right, hope this helps, and thanks for watching.